really, we've still just got the bare facts of what happened on Monday afternoon, namely that a Chinese fighter jet came up and approached an Australian surveillance plane, let off a number of flares, two of which came very close to the Australian P-8, something that obviously caused quite a bit of alarm to the Australian government. Now, the Defence Minister this morning has been asked a series of questions, including questions about exactly where this happened. All we know at the moment is that this was a supposedly routine patrol in the South China Sea, a pretty vast area. What would be useful to know, at least from our perspective, is a bit more detail on this. Did it happen over some of those artificial islands and other features that China has built up in its efforts to militarise the region? Did it happen over some of those features that are disputed between China and other partners and other regions, countries in the region, including the Philippines? Did it happen over, for example, a PLAN naval vessel that Australia was surveilling? If we had information on that, we'd have a better sense of exactly what Australia was doing and exactly why China might have responded as it did. But of course, the fundamental question comes down to exactly what the South China Sea is. Australia points to international rulings that have made it clear that this is not simply a Chinese lake and that China's claims over the entire area are invalid. China has disregarded that ruling, and it says the entirety of the South China Sea within the so-called 9-dash line is its territory, and it's got a right to kick out Australian and other militaries that intrude upon that area. And that's at the heart of this dispute. We had a statement overnight from the Chinese military. In that statement, the PLA spokesperson said that Australia had essentially come into Chinese territory. As I said, that's fiercely disputed by the Australian side, but that's how China characterises it, and says that the PLA took steps to both monitor and then effectively, quote, expel the Australian plane from that area. So that seems to be a reference to the aggressive actions that were taken by the fighter jet to let those flare-offs very close to the Australian aircraft, effectively as a warning. But Richard Marles, for his part, when he was asked about this morning, the Defence Minister, he simply said that Australia was asserting its right to under international law to fly over these seas. He also fielded questions about whether he should pick up the phone to try and get in touch with his counterpart to register his concerns rather than leaving it to senior officials who made those representations both in Beijing and in Canberra. Mr. Marles said that he took every opportunity to do that. He didn't pick up the phone on this instance, but he said whenever he had a chance to sit down with his counterpart, he raises incidents like this. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Whenever I meet with my counterpart, we raise these issues, and that has been the case when the Chief of the Defence Force was most recently in China. So we take those opportunities. But I would want to be really clear that we now have a very set procedure when incidents of this kind occur. It actually matters that there are very consistent behaviours.
It's in a sense quite telling that there is this set procedure that Australia has now set down, and that's because these incidents are now happening pretty regularly, not constantly. They're by no means, weekly occurrences, but we've seen, 3 or so comparable instances over the last 18 months and half a dozen or so over the last 4 or 5 years. So they're happening now regularly enough that Australia needs to institute these procedures. Of course, as more than one person has pointed out over the last few days or so, the risk here goes up every time. So the real thing that Australia, I suspect, worries about is that there is a miscalculation during one of these very tense encounters that results in either defence material or equipment or assets being damaged, or even worse, either an Australian or a Chinese member of the military being injured or perhaps worse. Now, that hasn't happened so far, but every time we have an incident like this, the risk of a miscalculation goes up, even if it's only slightly. And that's what I suspect is keeping planners and officials here in Canberra awake at night.